Graduation was supposed to feel like possibility, but to me, it felt like air running out of a room. That afternoon, I ended up at the same coffee shop where everyone liked to gather after classes. It smelled like roasted beans and arrogance. I hadn't planned to stay long, but then I saw them, my old group huddled around a table, loud as ever. Their laughter filled the place. My stomach dropped, yet I walked over, hoping for at least a friendly hello. They asked what I was doing now, that gentle-sounding question meant to size you up. I told them the truth, still looking for a job. The pause that followed burned. Then someone chuckled, and Mark leaned back in his chair and said, "Dreamer boy, still dreaming, huh?" The others howled like it was the best line of the day. I managed a smile, the polite kind people use when they're trying not to break in public. He kept going, describing how everyone else had offers lined up, hinting maybe I should dream smaller. Each word hit like grit against my skin. I laughed softly just to keep breathing, stirring my coffee so they wouldn't see my hands tremble. The worst part wasn't his joke. It was the way no one stopped him. Not one friend looked uncomfortable. They savored it. My humiliation tasted sweet to them. Something inside me went still. I realized no apology or job title would ever make them see me differently. To them, I was failure wrapped in potential, safe to mock, because I would never fight back. I finished my drink, stood up, and said I had things to do. More laughter followed me to the door, bouncing off the bright walls, still ringing when I stepped outside into the sharp afternoon light. That sound stayed with me, their laughter echoing in my chest louder than any insult. By the time I reached the street corner, the noise had turned into something else. Not shame, not anger, just a promise whispered quietly to myself. They would remember my name again one day, but it wouldn't be as a punchline. I walked home that day without hearing a thing. Cars moved, horns blared, people talked around me, but it all sounded far away. My mind kept replaying the laughter I had left behind. Every step felt like another reminder that I had nothing to show for years of trying. I reached my small apartment, closed the door, and let the quiet swallow me. That silence was heavy, almost mocking, yet somehow comforting. No one could laugh inside it but me. For a long while, I sat at my table, staring at my reflection in the dark laptop screen. All I had was an old machine running slower than my thoughts and a few unpaid bills stacked in crooked towers. I didn't cry or shout. I opened the browser and searched for jobs I wasn't qualified for, scrolling through rejection disguised as opportunity. Then I started typing how to make money online. What came up looked ridiculous at first. Low-paying gigs, strange terms, endless advice threads. Still, I kept reading. Somewhere between frustration and curiosity, I found a small freelance site offering short marketing tasks. I took one, then another. The pay barely covered coffee, but people were paying attention to my work. That mattered more than the money. Days turned into weeks. Sleep thinned. Every night I learned something new. Social ads, copywriting, analytics, anything free I could find. Watching tutorials at 3 a.m. became routine. My sneakers wore out from walking to the library Wi-Fi when my home connection failed, but I kept going because silence demanded movement. I needed proof that my life was more than their laughter. By the end of that first month, I'd completed 20 tiny projects. Clients liked me. One sent a message that started with, "Great job." 2 words, yet they felt like oxygen. I printed it, pinned it to the wall, and stared at it every night before sleeping on my broken couch. No one knew what I was building. No one asked. But the quiet taught me something. Ambition is loudest when nobody's listening. That silence became my teacher, my fuel, and my revenge. It whispered one clear command: keep going. Momentum carried me for a while, then reality slammed me back down. The small gigs slowed, payments stalled, and for every client who said great job, 3 vanished without paying. My savings shrank until groceries turned into dry noodles and canned soup. Still, every morning I opened the laptop as if the act alone might conjure success. I wrote proposals by the dozens, each one polite, hopeful, and ignored. Rejection emails piled up faster than assignments. Some were cold templates, others blunt. We went with someone more experienced. I started reading them out loud, turning disappointment into background noise. Rent deadlines drew closer. I took side jobs delivering flyers, fixing screens, anything that kept the lights running. The thought of quitting visited me nightly. I pictured walking back into that coffee shop, pretending the laughter never happened, admitting defeat. That image stopped me every time. I'd rather starve quietly than give them that satisfaction. So I worked through exhaustion, fingers numb, vision blurry from the screen's blue light. Then came the message that changed everything, or so I thought. A small online store needed help improving sales. "We can't afford much, but we're desperate," they wrote. Desperation recognized desperation. I poured into that project like my survival depended on it, because it did. I redesigned their ads, rewrote their product descriptions, chased analytics I barely understood. For weeks, nothing shifted. I refreshed their dashboard hourly, praying to numbers that refused to move. I felt failure stalking me again, whispering that maybe talent and effort weren't enough. One night, I nearly hit delete on the whole campaign. Instead, I took one last look, tweaked a headline, rewrote an ad in my voice, honest and raw instead of polished marketing fluff. The next morning, sales had doubled, then tripled. Comments flooded in under their posts. My phone buzzed so much it fell off the table. For the first time in months, silence didn't feel oppressive. It felt earned. I hadn't beaten failure yet, but I'd drawn first blood. That first success slammed through me like adrenaline. I barely slept the next 48 hours, obsessed with checking numbers climb on my screen. The client messaged me nonstop, thanking me like I had saved their entire dream. It wasn't much money, but it felt like validation I had starved for. What began as a last-ditch effort suddenly looked like a blueprint for something bigger. I started listing my services properly, building a tiny website, writing in my own voice instead of copying others. New inquiries trickled in. Word spread from one client to another, and soon my inbox turned into proof that I had value. I didn't have fancy gear or a degree in marketing, only restless determination and a lot of trial and error wounds. 3 months later, I rented a shared workspace with creaky desks and fluorescent lights that buzzed louder than conversation. There, I met 2 freelancers who shared the same hunger and insomnia. We worked out of paper cups and cheap pizza, trading ideas and small victories like treasure. When one of them said, "We could start a company," I laughed. But an hour later, we were sketching a logo on napkins. The name didn't matter as much as the reason. We were building something that belonged to us. By the end of the year, our 3-person hustle turned into a registered business. We landed clients bigger than I'd thought possible. I hired my first employee, paid my overdue medical bills, and for the first time, sent money to my parents instead of asking for help. Every milestone tasted bittersweet. Success didn't erase the memory of that coffee shop laughter. It just made it quieter. I thought about sending a message to Mark, showing him what perseverance looked like. But I didn't. I told myself real power was staying silent until the echo of mockery faded on its own. One night, walking home from the office, city lights reflecting on car roofs, it hit me. I no longer feared being seen as the dreamer. I was the dream realized. Yet beneath the pride was something sharper. A desire I couldn't name yet, waiting patiently for its turn. Everything expanded faster than I imagined. We moved from that buzzing shared space into a real office with glass doors, branded mugs, and an assistant who scheduled calls instead of me chasing them. Every detail felt like proof that effort worked. I wore suits now, shook hands confidently, even smiled for magazine interviews about young entrepreneurs. Yet underneath the noise of success, something quieter kept tugging at me, the echo of laughter from years ago. For a long time, I thought success would drown memory. It didn't. Each applause only reminded me who had once called me Dreamer Boy. At presentations, when clients praised our strategy, I sometimes caught myself glancing toward the door, as if waiting for old ghosts to wander in and take credit or laugh it away. My partners celebrated milestones loudly, but I spent nights alone at the office scrolling through early invoices, remembering the exhaustion that built it all. The harder we grew, the heavier the silence afterward felt. Growth should have healed, yet it hollowed parts of me that stayed unfinished. To forget, I buried myself in work. New campaigns, overseas clients, endless meetings. My calendar became armor. Each success stacked like sandbags against insecurity, but it couldn't block the whisper buried under pride. When will they know? One evening, while reviewing new contracts, I saw a blurred line of names from a smaller firm we'd partnered with for a routine project. I didn't pay much attention then, but even that night something strange stirred, an intuition that the past never disappears. It waits, patient and polite, for its cue. I switched off the lights and watched the reflection of the city through the glass walls, bright, distant, proud. For the first time since that coffee shop, I felt both invincible and unfinished, as if success was only half the story, and the rest was still waiting to walk through my door. A few weeks later, HR slid a stack of papers onto my desk. New hires from a subcontracting agency, routine work, nothing dramatic. I skimmed casually until 3 names froze me in place. Mark, Evan, Lewis, the same trio from that coffee shop. My heartbeat stuttered. The page blurred for a moment, then sharpened again under the weight of recognition. Curiosity flared stronger than anger. I asked HR for details under the guise of standard review. They worked for one of our satellite partners doing campaign coordination, technically contracted under us. They probably had no idea my agency was the parent company. I leaned back in my chair, torn between disbelief and amusement. Life's sense of symmetry sometimes borders on genius. For minutes, I just stared out the window, watching traffic lines crawl across the street below. I thought about how they'd laughed at my empty pockets, certain their future was written in bright ink, while mine was penciled and erasable. Somewhere along the line, fortunes had quietly reversed, and I hadn't even noticed it happening. Part of me wanted to call them immediately, announce my triumph, see their faces twist in recognition. Another part whispered restraint. Real power doesn't shout. It observes, so I said nothing. I signed the hiring approvals myself and passed the papers back to HR with a simple, "Looks fine." That night, I couldn't stop imagining the first encounter. Would they recognize me at all? I scanned recent photos online and realized fame loves distance. I looked sharper, more polished. Success adds years that confidence doesn't show. They might not connect the person they mocked to the one they now indirectly worked for. Still, a quiet promise formed again, the same one that began years ago. I wouldn't chase revenge. I'd let time deliver it to my doorstep. If fate wanted us in the same building, I would welcome the irony politely, shake its hand, and wait. It happened on a Tuesday afternoon. I stepped out of my office to grab a cup of coffee from the break room, the same brand I used to pour for clients when all I had was gratitude. The hum of conversation drifted through the doorway, light and careless, until a familiar laugh sliced through. I froze. Mark. That same mocking edge I had memorized years ago. He stood by the counter with Evan and Lewis, coffee cups in hand, gossiping about the mysterious CEO. They joked that whoever ran this company must have inherited it or lucked out during a boom. Mark's voice carried above the rest, teasing about the kind of guy who probably never had to struggle. I leaned quietly against the frame, hidden from view. They hadn't noticed me. Their laughter rolled through the room, echoing perfectly with the past I'd tried to forget. Each chuckle hit a nerve that hadn't dulled. Hearing them mock the person I'd become, unaware it was me, felt like stepping back through time, watching an old wound reopen itself. For a moment, anger roared hot, but underneath it was something almost cold. I realized I didn't feel hatred anymore, just clarity. Mockery was their language, their comfort zone. I wouldn't speak it. I turned, coffee untouched, and walked back to my office before they saw me. That night, I stayed late, reviewing reports on their performance. They weren't bad workers, just sloppy, overconfident. My managers had mentioned missed deadlines, skipped meetings, careless remarks toward juniors. I highlighted every note in quiet silence. Revenge didn't need yelling. It needed patience. Before locking up, I looked around the darkened office. Glass reflections stared back, an empire built from the pieces they once laughed at. Maybe the universe keeps receipts after all. Their laughter had pushed me to build this, and now they were standing under my roof, mocking what they served. I smiled slightly to no one in particular. Let them laugh a little longer. They'd soon realize who was listening. The next few weeks became a quiet test of control. I wanted to walk into that break room, slam my mug onto the counter, and announce exactly whose company they had been ridiculing. But I didn't. I knew satisfaction would taste sweeter if it came at the right moment, not in the heat of pride. So instead, I let the days roll on, watching closely without a word. I studied them the way they once studied me, turning my life into a punchline. I noticed Mark arriving late, his excuses thin. Evan hiding his mistakes behind sarcastic jokes. Lewis treating interns like inconveniences. None of it surprised me. The arrogance that mocked me years ago had simply aged into laziness. Every report I received became another piece of ammunition, and I stacked the evidence quietly, detail by detail. What amused me most was how oblivious they were. They walked through the office freely, bragged about their small victories, and rolled their eyes at criticism. They had no idea that the man they gossiped about while sipping cheap coffee was sitting just a few walls away, reading every line of their performance records. Patience reshaped me. Instead of rushing to expose them, I let their own behavior solidify the case. My managers whispered complaints more often, and I encouraged them to document everything. Every meeting, every missed deadline, every dismissive laugh toward a colleague. I wanted it written down, undeniable. In quieter moments, I found myself comparing then to now. They had laughed at me when I had nothing. Now I held everything they had once claimed was theirs, but I still didn't parade it. I wore my success the same way I wore my silence years before. Tightly, deliberately, waiting for the exact right time to release it. At night, walking past the empty desks lit by soft lamp glow, I thought of how revenge looks in imagination versus reality. It isn't always loud. Sometimes it is watching pride erode under its own weight, while you simply wait for the inevitable collapse. I didn't need to destroy them. They were already chipping away at themselves. 2 months later, the push arrived. Performance complaints had turned into patterns into losses. I gathered the reports into a neat folder, set them on my desk, and called for an all-staff meeting. The email went out under a simple subject line, Professional Conduct Review. I made sure every department would be there. When the day came, the conference room filled quickly. Dozens of faces facing the front, coffee cups clinking against the tension. Mark, Evan, and Lewis wandered in late, still laughing at some private joke. They took seats near the back, unaware that the joke had already ended. They just didn't know it yet. I stayed at the door for a moment, letting the silence grow thick before stepping forward. Conversation slowed. Chairs stopped squeaking. Their laughter cut off mid-sentence when they saw me take the head seat. I didn't rush. Power works best when it moves slowly. "Thank you for being here," I began. "We've seen impressive growth this quarter, but along with that comes responsibility. Professionalism isn't optional." My tone was calm, measured. I spoke of teamwork, respect, and accountability. Eyes watched me carefully, waiting to see where this was going. Halfway through, I opened the folder. "Some of you," I continued, "have made choices that don't match this company's values." I read snippets, missed deadlines, rude comments, poor leadership. I didn't say names, not yet. The guilty ones felt the room stiffen. Mark shifted in his chair, confused. Evan stopped smirking, sensing trouble. Then I looked straight at them. "Mark, Evan, Lewis," their heads jerked up. "I appreciate your enthusiasm for humor," I said evenly. "But this company needs more respect than ridicule." The room went still. I let their surprise ripen before adding, "When you joked about your mysterious CEO over coffee, I hope the taste was good, because you were laughing about me." The color drained from their faces. A few quiet gasps flickered through the room. I could almost hear the gears turning behind their wide eyes, trying to reconcile the man they mocked with the one standing in command. I caught the faintest tremble in Mark's hands. Silence filled every corner until I broke it, my voice calm again. "We'll address personal accountability in private meetings right after this. For now, let's remember that respect travels upward, downward, and sideways. Dismiss these truths, and you dismiss your future here." No one breathed for a few seconds after I finished. The power had shifted, final and undeniable. The laughter that once haunted me had choked itself quiet. As the team dispersed in uneasy silence, I watched my old tormentors filing out among them, faces pale, voices gone. When the meeting room emptied, I asked Mark, Evan, and Lewis to stay. The door clicked shut behind them, snapping whatever illusion of power they still had. They stood awkwardly near the wall, pretending calm, but their hands betrayed them. Fingers twitched, breath shallow. I sat at the head of the table again, the same seat they once said belonged to a man who got lucky. Mark finally spoke first, his voice strained. "Hey man, we didn't mean anything by those jokes." I let the words hang in the air before answering. "You never did. That's what made it worse." His face paled, and silence followed like a verdict. Evan tried to laugh it off, blaming stress, deadlines, misunderstanding. Lewis said nothing, staring at the carpet as if it might open and swallow him whole. I slid 3 envelopes across the table, termination letters waiting, already signed. Every line documented: insubordination, poor performance, failure to uphold company values. Their faces froze. Mark reached for arguments but found none. Evan breathed out a broken laugh that sounded closer to panic than humor. "You once told me," I said quietly, "that some people aren't built to win." "Maybe you were right. It just wasn't me." The room felt smaller, their arrogance collapsing under truth's weight. They muttered apologies that tripped over themselves, desperate and messy. For the first time, I didn't feel hatred, only distance, as if their humiliation no longer belonged to me. Mark whispered, "Come on, it was years ago." I met his eyes. And still unforgettable. I stood, gathered my papers slowly, and nodded toward the door. Security would escort them out, not out of spite, but procedure. The same way life had escorted me out of comfort into purpose. As they left, Mark turned back as if to say something else, but the words never came. The door closed behind them with a soft click, quieter than laughter, yet infinitely louder in meaning. For a long moment I stood in that silence, breathing evenly. The table gleamed under the overhead light, spotless except for 3 empty chairs. It wasn't triumph that filled me, just closure. I didn't win by shouting or demanding acknowledgement. I won by outlasting them. Word spread before they even cleared the hallway. Offices thrive on whispers, and this one traveled faster than email. Faces peeked from cubicles as Mark led the line toward the exit, jaw tight, eyes fixed forward. Evan trailed behind, muttering under his breath, more anger than shame, while Lewis stared at the floor, shoulders rounded inward. The security guard followed quietly, professional, unbothered. Someone near the printers gasped when they passed. Another looked down at their keyboard, pretending not to stare. The silence that accompanied them was heavier than any applause I could have imagined. No one laughed. No one spoke. The same crowd that laughed with them before had learned there was nothing funny left. At the glass doors, Mark broke. He turned, trying to speak through clenched emotions. "It was a joke," he said, voice cracking. "You know that, right?" His words bounced off the marble and landed flat. I didn't answer. My stillness was louder than any grievance. Evan cursed under his breath, kicking the mat on his way out. The echo of his frustration filled the space behind them like smoke that wouldn't clear. When the doors slid shut, the office stayed frozen. I stood a few steps back, watching calm settle over the team like fragile glass. Then I spoke, voice steady but firm. "Let's get back to work." Everyone nodded quickly, returning to their desks, typing, breathing, existing as if gravity had returned after a storm. Inside me, it wasn't celebration. It was stillness, the kind that settles after noise collapses on itself. I walked back to my office, closed the door, and exhaled until my lungs ached. I wasn't proud of firing them, but I wasn't sorry either. Justice rarely looks noble up close. It looks necessary. Through the smoky tint of the window, I watched them cross the parking lot. Their laughter was gone, replaced by silence that would follow them further than they imagined. That silence was the same one that had built me, only now it belonged to them. Karma doesn't shout. It walks you to the door and leaves you outside. The day after the walkout felt different. The office wasn't louder or busier, yet the air carried something new: respect. People held doors for one another, conversations softened, jokes stopped turning cruel. Even the air conditioner hum seemed polite. My calendar was packed, but every handshake came with steady eye contact now. They understood who I was, not because of title or money, but because silence had proved sharper than ego. I gathered the entire team near the end of the week. No grand speech, no victory lap. I told them we'd had a rough lesson and that we all owed each other better standards. I reminded everyone that talent is meaningless without humility. Heads nodded, a few eyes lowered. No one wanted to be the next example carved into rumor. Inside, I struggled with conflicting feelings. Part of me liked the authority, the hidden thrill of turning pain into control. Another part knew this wasn't about revenge anymore. I didn't want fear guiding respect. I wanted something cleaner, mutual dignity, shared goals. So I invited open dialogue, asked for suggestions on building better culture. The meeting shifted from tension to collaboration. For once, I saw cautious smiles returning without sarcasm. Later, in the quiet of my office, I sat watching people through the glass wall. They talked, worked, existed in simple peace. Their voices were no longer sharp edges. It struck me that maybe justice's most lasting form is balance, not punishment. What I built wasn't just a company, it was proof that hurt can evolve into structure if you let patience carve it properly. At closing time, a new intern knocked gently to deliver paperwork. Before leaving, she said, "I heard what happened. Thanks for standing up for people like us." The words lingered long after she'd gone. I realized the respect I'd earned backward, from humiliation to authority, wasn't built on power. It was built on example. I turned off the lights, stared at the reflection in the dark glass, and allowed myself a quiet, brief smile. The silence inside me finally felt peaceful instead of heavy. Friday evening arrived wrapped in soft sunset light. The office had emptied, and for once I left before the cleaning crew arrived. I drove without planning, guided by muscle memory until neon signs gave way to recognition. The same coffee shop stood on the corner, unchanged in every detail. The chalkboard menu, the slow jazz spilling through open doors, the hum of small conversations. I parked and walked in, feeling an odd pulse of nostalgia under my ribs. The barista didn't know me. None of the staff did. Years had blurred the younger version of myself into someone sharper, steadier. I ordered the same drink I bought the day laughter stuck in my bones, a cup of black coffee, bitter, strong, unforgiving. When it arrived, I carried it to the same table in the corner where everything once cracked apart. The chair scraped the floor exactly the same way it had all those years ago. I sat down and let memory unspool quietly. I saw that younger man again, voice small, smiling through humiliation, pretending coffee could hide trembling hands. I wanted to tell him he'd make it, that he'd live long enough to toast the pain instead of drowning in it. But ghosts don't need reassurance. They need closure. I raised the cup slowly, mirroring the motion I'd made that afternoon. This time my hand didn't shake. The first sip was still bitter, still hot, but it didn't burn, it warmed. Outside, the world moved indifferently. Inside, the air seemed lighter. The laughter that had once carved itself into my mind had finally gone silent. What replaced it wasn't triumph or spite. It was calm recognition. I set the empty cup down, watching ripples settle at the bottom. They faded one by one, leaving clear stillness. Maybe that's what success truly is. Not noise, not applause, but still water where chaos used to thrash. I smiled once more at the memory, stood, and left a generous tip. The door chimed behind me softly as I stepped back into evening air. One chapter had ended at that table. Tonight, the same table sealed it. Driving home, city lights stretched across the windshield like a quiet applause. For years, I'd chased vindication, convinced that victory meant proving someone wrong. But as the streets blurred by, I realized the laughter that once haunted me no longer hurt. It felt distant, like an old recording you recognize but no longer replay. Somewhere between humiliation and triumph, the noise had lost power. When I reached my apartment, I left my phone face down and sat by the window. The city hummed indifferent. I thought about every step that had led here. Empty wallets, restless nights, first clients, first employees, the faces that mocked me and the ones that believed. Each one had built the framework of who I was now. Success had been the banner, but evolution was the real prize. People think revenge is loud, but it's quieter than anyone admits. It's the slow fade of bitterness replaced by clarity. It's walking through the same doors that once closed on you, and realizing you don't need to rub your victory in anyone's face. Time already did the talking. Even karma, I've learned, whispers. I wondered what Mark, Evan, and Lewis were doing now. Maybe they found new jobs. Maybe they'll remember that day differently. Either way, it's no longer my story to carry. The past did its job. It taught me, hardened me, then stepped aside. I poured a glass of water, not champagne, and raised it in a small private toast. To growth, to silence, to no longer needing revenge. The reflection in the window barely looked like the man who once faked laughter to survive a coffee shop joke. Outside, the city pulsed with life I didn't need to chase anymore. I leaned back in the chair, listening to nothing but the echo of my own breath. Peace, simple and undramatic, filled the space where vengeance used to live. And for the first time in years, I felt completely free.